and welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who will offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance that really help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Welcome back to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and my guest, Debs Davies. And we've been talking in this series of 4 episodes all about neurodiversity in the early years space and what we can do as practitioners to really value all children and create a space where they can thrive. So in this final episode, Debs, I just want to try and pull together all the many things that we've talked about, but pull out those salient points about what, if I was an early years practitioner and I may have 2-year-olds, I may have 5-year-olds, what is it that I can do tomorrow to help really support the development of the children that I'm looking after?
I think the thing that I would like people to take away from this is that real sense of what benefits neurodivergent children benefits everybody too. I think the practical things are, to pick up on some of the key themes we've been talking about, assuming, moving away from assuming that a behaviour means something and actually asking, or depending, in an age appropriate way, just trying to understand, well, actually, what might this behaviour be a signifier of? Yeah. If this child doesn't want to come from the sandpit to the carpet, what might that mean? Can they actually still listen from where they are in the sandpit? Is there perhaps a sensory need that they're meeting for their hands to be in the sand that helps them to pay attention? What else might actually be going on, that is meeting a need that means that the child can engage without actually assuming that they are kind of defiant or non-compliant? So I think it's getting beyond those assumptions about what the presenting behaviour means and actually thinking about what else could be happening instead, and is that okay? I think the other thing for me would be about thinking about acceptance versus punishment and where punishment might be here. And that's not to say that, any child should be kind of let off the hook, so to speak, but it's about understanding how punishment might impact ADHD kids or neurodivergent children, particularly long term. So things like missing break times will typically be a punishment that's given, whereas that is often a time for neurodivergent children to be able to regulate their emotions, to have a brain break, to be able to get away from the stress that they feel of being in the classroom. And so actually keeping them in the classroom, not allowing them to regulate, not allowing them to connect with their friends is actually quite, potentially quite damaging for them.
I think often in those punishments we ask, especially in early years, you ask children to be still. So you might be saying, go and sit on the carpet, go and sit at a table, because you can't sit quietly on the carpet, go and sit on a chair, or you'll take some time out, or, I've come across a thing called the thinking chair, which always makes me smile, because the idea of a 4-year-old taking some time out to sit in a chair and then saying, thank you for the opportunity to take some time out to sit and think about my behaviour, I won't do that again, is just bizarre. And it is the idea that if children are demonstrating physical manifestations of their feelings, that we then try and get them to sit still to make them not do that thing, when actually what we need to be thinking is, right, if you are wriggly or if you're crawling about on your hands and knees, it could just be the person who's talking to you is really dull. And if lots of children are doing it, that's probably giving you quite a clear message that, you've not hit the mark with your input this particular day. But if it's that same child, and again, you're often saying, sorry, children, we're going to stop for the behaviour of one rude boy and Freddie can't sit still. And part of that is, obviously, it's Freddie again, so everybody sees it's Freddie. But another key element is that idea of the kind of public humiliation behaviour management technique, where Freddie, for whatever reason, say, he hasn't got ADHD, he's neurodivergent, can't sit still, or that's not his preferred way of learning, the fact that you're constantly publicly shaming his behaviour is not going to enable him or any other child to say, oh gosh, sorry, didn't realise that's what you wanted of me, I'll now do it. It's just going to erode that self-esteem, which we talked about in the last episode.
Absolutely. And it's not just that it erodes the self-esteem, it's that what you're signaling to that child is you've got to sit apart from everybody else so you don't belong because you're different. Yeah. And neurodivergent people feel different anyway. I always felt different. I didn't know why, but I always felt different.
Yeah.
And so we already feel different because we know we think differently and we know we've got different needs. And so actually something that demonstrates that to other people is actually very shaming, and will make us feel more different. And of course, what it signals to the other children in that environment increasingly over time is, oh, you shouldn't be friends with Freddie because he's always in trouble. And so,
yes, and then, I mean, I've said before, your children will say, Freddie's the naughty boy. And so if you're 3 and 4 and you're already telling me that Freddie's the naughty boy, Freddie also will hear you saying Freddie's the naughty boy.
Yeah.
And I think the key, it hit the nail right in the head really, is that neurodivergent children, adults will feel different because what they're being asked to do and the way they're being asked to do it is completely alien to how they process the world. It's like anybody who hasn't got that level of neurodiversity being plucked out and dropped into a world where everything was completely wired in a different way. So you are, even from very early on, going to get a sense of, I don't find I'm able to do things that everybody else is doing. And it won't be conscious, I would imagine, if you're 2, 3, 4 years old. But what it becomes then is just the narrative that exists in your head.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that ties into what we were saying previously about self-efficacy and people's mental health as they get older. We know that shame is a huge factor in, people's mental health, particularly for neurodivergent people, that, the shame that they face. And also, that kind of idea of the thinking chair. Actually, if you've got a child that needs to move and they're being asked to sit in a chair, to sit still in a chair, to think about what they've done wrong, then what actually you're training them to do is override their own needs and not pay attention to their needs, because their need is to move. And you're telling them that that's wrong for them to move, and that they need to think about the fact that they shouldn't move. And actually, they're only meeting a need for them to be able to focus and engage in the learning. And so over time, what people learn to do is override those needs constantly. So by the time they're adults and they come and work with me, they say things to me like, I can't do that. I don't know what to do. I can't stand up for myself. I can't ask for that because, somebody will say no. I can't ask for that need to get met because somebody thinks I shouldn't need it. So there's a whole narrative that develops from being really young, as people progress through to adulthood, that actually shows itself by the time somebody's kind of sat opposite me. I
think, again, what we talked about in earlier episodes is the fact that if you have a way of articulating and recognizing your neurodiversity and you're aware of the things that you're really strong at, as we all are, and the things we're not so good at, because neurodivergent people will hit barriers all the way through their lives. It could be from going from reception into year 1. It could be when you move into primary school, secondary school, or the workplace. Because as we sit at the moment as a society, yes, there's a growing conversation around ADHD and neurodivergence, but still there are workplaces that aren't set up for people who are neurodiverse. So if you can articulate your own preferred learning style or how your neurodiversity presents, then when you go to an employer, you're able to say, well, actually, this is who I am, this is what I am, this is how I work best, these are some things you could do to support that. Whereas if you've been constantly suppressed by having to squash who you are and try and comply, then you can see when you go into workplaces, you're almost setting yourself up, not necessarily for failure, but not to thrive in that space.
Yeah.
Because you haven't always to kind of suppress how you do what you do to the best of your ability.
Absolutely. And even before that, you know, an awareness of somebody's neurodivergence helps them to select those work environments, those careers and those work environments that are more set up for them, you know, so that they don't find themselves going into a work environment thinking that's all that's available to them, and then trying to make it work for them, which is actually really, really common, particularly where people have been undiagnosed, of course. You know, to give people that kind of agency of, your brain works differently. You know, you've got a Mac brain and not a Windows brain. Let's look at what careers suit you, what work environments you need to be in, where those affirming work environments are. And actually, you have got the choice to do that. You don't have to keep trying to squeeze your square peg into the round hole that doesn't suit you. But there is a square-shaped peg that suits you in a work environment. And helping people to recognise that they've got that agency is really, really important, because that's the difference very often between people feeling like they can thrive or not, you know, or feeling like a success or not, because it helps them to build on their strengths.
And I think it's right back to what we all want, which is the idea that we want to thrive and not just survive, and that the world often is set up in a way that it makes it a harder job for somebody with ADHD to thrive. But if we take that right back to those kind of early years spaces, that thinking around the fact that, you know, when we are putting children's names on the board because they can't sit still, when we have moved their peg from the sunshine to the very sad cloud because they haven't come out of the sand when we asked them, if we are publicly shaming them to the rest of the children by saying you can't sit still, or sending them out of assembly, you know, with the whole rest of the school watching them because they're unable to sit still. And again, you were right that our society is structured in such a way that there is a level of compliance, and children need to learn about how you exist within your own space and how you effectively exist with other people within that space. So it's not about saying, let all children just run amok and do whatever they want to do. But it's about saying realistic expectations for individual children. And also what we do when we value children who are different in whatever way they are different is we give a really good life lesson to everybody else in that space, that we're not all the same, that we've all got different views and values and colours of hair and colours of eyes and colours of skin. And also there are things that you can't see on the outside that also make you different. And we have to respect, value and support that in exactly the same way. So by saying, well, this is how we operate here, and I know that Freddie needs to do this, or this really helps Freddie to learn, and when to help you learn we do this, and to help you learn we do this, and to help Freddie learn we do that. I think it teaches like life lessons, society-wide life lessons around, when I become an adult, I am then going to be far more respectful. And when I'm an employer, potentially, or a fellow employee, I am going to provide a space that values everybody in it, because that's part of my fibre, not thinking, well, actually, if you can't sit still, or if you're repeatedly late for work, I mean, there could be lots of reasons why that happens, or you're constantly losing the key to the filing cabinet. Those are the things that are going to tip me over the edge. So even those big things that happen later on in life, really, the seeds are absolutely sown.
Absolutely.
In the very beginning.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel so strongly that our generation should be the last generation of late diagnosed, misdiagnosed, undiagnosed people. And to make that a reality, then the changes have to happen in that early years setting, because that's the only way we create that generational shift. It's so important. And I think that, you know, that sense that you talked about of, you know, people being sent out of assembly, for example, loneliness and isolation is a significant factor for a lot of adults, neurodivergent adults. And a lot of that is completely avoidable. A lot of the mental health struggles that neurodivergent people have is avoidable. Not all of it, but some of it. And certainly the bit that relates to, you're a bad child, you're naughty, you're different, go and stand in the corner and we'll separate you from everybody else. We all have that need for belonging. Yeah. We all want to belong. We all have that need for connection. We all have that need to feel safe and accepted by the people around us. And fundamentally, if people don't feel that, then the impact is going to show itself in their well-being and mental health downstream really, really soon. And so I think that, those messages are really important. And for me, it also goes to, it's not just about fidgeting and, speaking out if somebody might not have put their hand up. It's also things like understanding when children ask questions, why. I mean, I know that in the early years setting, they're still in that very curious phase where why is still a very dominant question.
Yeah.
But for a lot of neurodivergent children, they need to understand why they're doing something, what meaning it has, or what's the reason. And that can often be seen as being challenging. They're not being challenging, usually. What they're trying to do is understand, why is it important that I do this thing that you've asked me to do?
Yeah.
And so something as simple as that, if a child, for example, is told, because I said so, that makes no sense to a neurodivergent child who needs the reason why.
Yeah.
They're not being defiant, or challenging. They want to understand the reason why so that they can then do that thing that you've asked them to do.
Yeah, and be able to process it in a way that they understand it. And you can see why when that then follows them through early years into primary school, into secondary school, and also you might have had a sense of being different and you might have a sense of being othered, that all of those things take a huge toll on your mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
So, and they might end up present themselves as defiance or not, but it's really understandable. And I think what we've got, which is a great place to end, is that we've got a real opportunity to make a significant difference, both to our own awareness. And I know we started this by talking about personal circumstance, but even as an educator with 30 odd years experience, having been a head teacher and a consultant and goodness knows what else, my ADHD journey through having a personal experience has been huge but fascinating. And I kind of look back now and think, which is often the way, I wish I'd known or understood more, because I think I can even think about individual children going way back to when I very first started to teach 30 years ago, who I think now, if I think about their behaviour in the context of what I know and the environment that I created, which I thought was a good one, little wonder, I wonder if, or there was real potential that child was just seeing it differently. So I think as early years practitioners, we've got a real opportunity to upskill ourselves, and there's a lot of good information out there, but also to really challenge those traditional preconceptions that compliance means success. And actually, if we recognize and value diversity in all children and try and create spaces to encompass that, that's where the success is going to come from.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think the final thing I would say is that diagnosis isn't a bad thing.
Okay.
It can be life-saving, quite literally life-saving for people. My own diagnosis made so much sense to me. I also, like you, look back and think, I wish I'd known. And that's the case for a lot of people. And so I think there's a kind of real reticence, and particularly at the moment, because there's a backlash, about the increase in the number of people seeking diagnosis. Yes, diagnosis needs to be stringent and the standards in place and all of that. I hope that that's a given. But knowing that you're neurodivergent as early as you possibly can is really more helpful than anything else that anybody can do. learning to understand your brain, what your brain needs, is so, so critical. And, that's what I'd like people to understand. It's not a bad thing to get a diagnosis. It's a really, really helpful thing, because then it helps you to make sense of your world, and it helps you to know, actually, I can't sit still then. Or, I focus better with my hands. I mean, not that you necessarily consciously do that at that age, but I focus better with my hands in the sandpit because I can still listen to the story. It's made such a difference to me in understanding my life, and to so many other people as well. It gives us a much better understanding, and we're much more able to understand what our needs are and work out how to get those met, rather than facing that kind of, that life of isolation and the lack of well-being and the despondency in the education system and the, job hopping and all of that kind of thing, which unfortunately is still very prevalent. I really hope that, that's something that through this process we can start to phase out.
Yeah, and it is for me a really hopeful message, because we're moving in the right direction. We just need to move a little faster. Debs, it has been so fascinating, and I know we have only literally touched the tip of the iceberg. For both practitioners who might be listening to this thinking, gosh, that sounds a bit like me, or that sounds a bit like my partner, which is often the case, or my child. So I think what we would say is to people, get interested, read around the subject, but also just try and go back and look at your space and your children with as wide a lens as you possibly can. And even though it might feel a little bit scary, challenge some of those preconceptions and maybe let them keep their hands in the sand and see what happens. And you may end up being very pleasantly surprised. But Debs, thank you so much for all of your knowledge and insight in this podcast. It has been truly fascinating.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our guest Debs for joining us and providing such valuable insights. Now, you've been listening to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Debs Davies. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and also access exclusive follow-up content, which includes ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.